What if the daughter you thought died at birth suddenly looked you in the eyes 13 years later and called you Dad? What would you do if the daughter you buried 13 years ago looked you in the eyes at a gas station? Would you run freeze, or would you risk everything to find out the truth? Daniel Whitaker never imagined that a simple roadside stop would rip open a wound he spent over a decade trying to seal shut, a wound that had a name, a face, and a heartbeat. They told him she didn't survive, that Elena, his wife, had given birth to twins, and that the third baby hadn't made it. He had grieved a ghost, mourned a child who was never even allowed a name. But on that sweltering summer afternoon, standing beneath the buzzing neon sign of a forgotten gas station, Daniel saw the impossible. A girl, 13, small, skittish eyes too familiar to be coincidence. It wasn't just resemblance, it was a mirror. She had Riley's stubborn brow, Chloe's soft chin, and something in her gaze, something aching and ancient, like it remembered him. Time froze. His world tilted. For the first time in years, Daniel felt the weight of all he had lost, not just a daughter, but the chance to be the father she'd needed. Who was she? Where had she come from? And more hauntingly, who had taken her away before she ever had a chance to belong? What began as a moment of recognition quickly unraveled into a labyrinth of erased records, forged documents, and a shadow network that trafficked in silence and forgotten names. This wasn't just about family anymore. It was about justice. About a girl forced to live without a birthday, without a name, without a place in the world, and about a man who would stop at nothing, not money, not fear, not even the law, to bring her home. Because sometimes being a father isn't about biology. It's about choosing again and again to show up, even when the world tells you to let go. This is the story of a man who refused to forget, a girl who refused to disappear, and the fight to reclaim what should have never been taken. Not by death, not by system, not by shame. Their names are Daniel and Maya, and this time the world will remember them both. The sun bore down mercilessly on the cracked asphalt, painting the roadside in waves of heat that shimmered like illusions. Dust clung to the tires as Daniel Whitaker pulled his silver SUV into the faded parking lot of a gas station that looked like it hadn't been updated since the 90s. A bent metal sign creaked above the entrance, its red letters half peeled away by years of wind and sun. He turned off the engine, and a brief silence fell, a rare moment of calm in a life that hadn't seen peace in years. In the back seat, his daughter stirred. Riley, the older twin by 2 minutes, popped her earbuds out and squinted toward the store. "Do they even have cold drinks in there?" she mumbled, already unbuckling her seatbelt. Chloe, quieter and always more observant, stayed still for a second longer, eyes scanning the place with quiet suspicion, before reaching for her canvas tote bag. Daniel exhaled and stepped out, stretching his legs. The heat wrapped around him like a blanket of fire. Sweat instantly gathered at the back of his neck beneath his button-down shirt. He looked around, nothing but the open road behind them, and miles of silence ahead. This stop wasn't planned. They'd meant to power through until San Miguel, but Riley had gotten car sick, and Chloe had been nagging about water. Daniel didn't argue. Not today. Not when his mind was still foggy from the morning's news, another investor pulling out of the foundation, another speech he'd have to deliver tonight. He walked toward the pump, swiping his card with practiced efficiency. He didn't see the girl right away. Not through the glare, not through the fatigue. But she was there, already watching, already waiting. And when he would see her, really see her, everything he believed about the past 13 years would begin to unravel. As Daniel rounded the back of the SUV toward the small convenience store attached to the gas station, something made him pause. Not a sound, not a voice, but a sensation like a thread pulling at the back of his mind. He squinted through the haze rising from the pavement and caught sight of a small figure crouched beside a rusted vending machine half hidden in the shadow of the building. At first he assumed it was someone waiting for a ride, maybe the child of a trucker inside. But then she shifted slightly, just enough for a beam of sunlight to catch her face, and everything inside him went still. The girl was small, maybe 12 or 13, with long tangled hair and skin too pale for this heat. She wore a threadbare t-shirt, 2 sizes too big, and hugged her knees to her chest like the world had given her no reason to open up. But it was her face that hit him like a blow-sharp cheekbones, the same soft curve of the chin, the same hesitant downturn of the mouth. And her eyes. God, her eyes. Bright, gray-blue, unblinking. They looked up at him with a guarded intensity that felt less like curiosity and more like recognition. His heart stalled. For a fleeting, impossible moment, he thought he was staring at Chloe from years ago. Not similar. Identical. It wasn't déjà vu. It was something deeper. A rupture in time. He took a slow step forward, unable to stop himself. The girl flinched slightly but didn't run. Her fingers gripped a half-eaten piece of bread, and there was a smear of dried ketchup on her arm. She looked like someone who'd learned not to expect kindness. Daniel felt the breath catch in his chest, the kind of silent panic that only rises when your past suddenly stands in front of you with a pulse and a face. He didn't know who she was yet, but some part of him already did. Daniel stood frozen, one hand still loosely holding the gas pump, but his gaze locked entirely on the girl curled beside the vending machine. His mind scrambled for logic, any rational explanation for what he was seeing, but nothing came. His breathing slowed, shallow and deliberate, as if moving too quickly might shatter whatever strange reality he had stepped into. The girl didn't move. Her eyes stayed fixed on him, unreadable but alert, like she was studying him just as intently. Then from behind him, Riley's voice broke the stillness. "Dad, are we getting drinks or not?" He turned, abruptly, startled by the sound, as if being pulled out of a dream. Riley and Chloe were both standing just outside the SUV now. Riley with her arms crossed impatiently, Chloe holding a crumpled dollar bill in one hand. They followed his gaze, trying to understand what had captured his attention so completely. "What's wrong?" Chloe asked, her brow furrowing. "Dad, what is it?" Daniel opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. His eyes darted between the girl and his daughters, and the resemblance was impossible to ignore. His heart thudded so loudly he could feel it in his ears. "Do you see that?" he said quietly, almost to himself. Riley squinted. "You mean the kid by the vending machine?" Daniel gave a single nod, still staring. "She looks like someone," he muttered, voice thin with disbelief. Chloe tilted her head. "Like who?" But Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't. The weight in his chest was growing heavier by the second. Somewhere deep in his memory, something shifted, an image, a scream, a sterile room, a doctor shaking his head. And now here was this girl, alive, real, right in front of him. And everything he thought he knew about his family, about that night, suddenly felt fragile. Their eyes met, and the world seemed to fall into an unnatural silence. Time, for just a moment, no longer moved forward. The hum of the gas station lights, the low thrum of cars passing in the distance, even Riley's voice somewhere behind him. All of it faded into a kind of suspended stillness. Daniel was no longer a father running errands or a man distracted by work and fatigue. In that instant, he was something else entirely. Someone caught between the past and the present, pulled into a stare that felt impossibly familiar, yet utterly foreign. The girl didn't blink. She looked at him with the kind of guarded awareness that no child her age should have had to learn. There was no fear in her expression, but there was no trust either. Only a deep, searching stillness, like she was trying to decide whether or not he was real. Daniel's breath hitched. He didn't know her, and yet every fiber of his being screamed that he did. Her gaze wasn't just that of a stranger, it was a mirror, a living fragment of something he'd buried 13 years ago, a life the world had told him never existed. Her eyes, those bright, aching eyes, seemed to ask a question without words, a question that echoed back into the empty chamber of his memory. "Why didn't you come for me?" And though he didn't speak, the answer pulsed in his chest like a drumbeat of guilt. "Because I didn't know." The wind shifted slightly, carrying with it the dry scent of dust and gasoline. She tilted her head just enough for her messy hair to fall away from her cheek, revealing a faint scar near her left temple. Daniel inhaled sharply that tiny mark, unlocking a surge of something he couldn't name. recognition, horror, longing. They stayed like that, two strangers bound by something deeper than words, until Riley tugged gently at his sleeve, breaking the spell. But by then, something unspoken had already passed between them, something irreversible. Daniel didn't speak to the girl right away. After that haunting moment outside the gas station, he'd motioned quietly for his daughters to wait by the car, while he approached her slow and careful like one would with a frightened animal. She didn't flinch, but she didn't look away either. She let him come close enough to crouch beside her just outside arm's reach. "What's your name?" he asked gently. There was a long pause, as if she had to decide whether or not to answer. "Maya," she finally said, barely louder than a whisper. Her voice was rough, dry, like it hadn't been used in days. "Just Maya." Daniel pressed not to interrogate, but to understand. She nodded. I don't remember anything else." He looked down at her hands, dirt-stained fingernails, bitten to the quick. No bracelets, no backpack, no ID. "How old are you?" Another pause. She shrugged. 13, I think. That uncertainty lodged itself deep in Daniel's chest, a child unsure of her own age. "Where's your family?" he asked. Her eyes darkened then, and she turned her head away, focusing on a crack in the pavement. "She died," Maya said. "The woman who raised me. I called her Nana, but she wasn't my mom. She found me when I was a baby. Said no one came for me. So she took me home." Her voice wavered, but she didn't cry. She'd already gone through too much to waste tears now. Daniel felt a cold knot form in his stomach. A child with no birth certificate, no official name, no known relatives. Just a memory of a woman who had died, and a vague sense that she didn't quite belong anywhere. Maya wasn't just alone, she had been erased. And yet here she was, real, breathing, sitting in front of him like a ghost who refused to disappear. Daniel knew the decision made no logical sense. Every rule of parenting, every cautionary instinct told him not to get involved, especially not like this. She was a stranger, a lost girl with no papers, no family, no way to prove anything. And yet as he stood there beside her, listening to the quiet weight in her voice, he felt something shift inside him, something ancient and paternal that overrode reason. He asked her if she had a place to stay, and when she shook her head barely, he didn't hesitate. He didn't call social services, he didn't drive away. He looked at her one more time, saw the raw edges of exhaustion lining her face, the bruises that weren't visible but somehow unmistakable, and said, "Come on, let's get you somewhere safe for tonight." Maya followed without a word. She climbed into the back seat of his SUV hesitantly at first, as if waiting for the invitation to be revoked. Riley and Chloe stared confused, whispering questions he couldn't yet answer. Who is she? What's happening? Daniel didn't reply. He didn't know what to say. All he knew was that this wasn't something he could walk away from. Not this time. As he drove the silence in, the car was thick, the kind that pressed against the skin. He checked the rearview mirror more than once, watching Maya as she sat stiffly, hands folded in her lap, eyes locked on the passing landscape, like she was afraid to blink and lose it all. When they reached his house, he opened the door and guided her in without fanfare. No speeches, no promises. Just a clean guest room, a folded blanket, and a plate of warm food. It wasn't much, but it was more than the world had given her in a very long time. Daniel didn't know who Maya truly was or what bringing her home would mean, but something deeper than certainty had already spoken, and he chose to listen. That night, long after the house had gone quiet and his daughters were asleep, Daniel stood in the hallway outside the guest room where Maya now slept. The soft rhythm of her breathing was barely audible through the door, but it was enough to anchor him in place, hands pressed against the frame like he needed physical support to stay upright. He hadn't thought about that night in years, the night Elena gave birth, the night joy and grief had collided in one sterile hospital room. It had been chaotic, tense. Twins, the doctors said, complications but manageable. Riley had come first, wailing and strong. Chloe followed seconds later, smaller but stable. And then the shift panic in the room, whispers among the nurses, the sudden cold in the air. A third baby. A surprise. No one had mentioned 3. Daniel had been too stunned to process it, too consumed by the miracle of 2 healthy daughters to fully comprehend the fragmented phrases he overheard. Third fetus. Non-viable. No heartbeat. One nurse, a young woman with tired eyes and a trembling voice, had delivered the line that would haunt him for years. "I'm sorry, Mr. Whitaker. The third didn't make it. No birth certificate, no name, no body. Just a quiet, unspoken erasure." He had clung to Elena's hand that night as she wept for something she never saw. The doctors were kind, but firm. It was better not to dwell. Better to focus on the living. And so he had buried the thought of that third child beneath layers of rationality and silence, convincing himself it had been a medical tragedy, nothing more. But now, standing here, that memory cracked open like a fault line. And in its center was Maya, alive, breathing, with a face that looked like the past had never ended. Daniel sat alone in his study, the glow of the desk lamp casting long shadows across the floor. The documents he had brought home from the office lay untouched beside him, their contents blurred by the noise in his mind. He couldn't stop replaying the details: Maya's face, the way she flinched when someone reached too quickly, her awkward posture, the quiet grief she wore like second skin. And most of all, those eyes. They were hauntingly familiar. The same stormy blue he saw in the mirror every time he looked at Chloe. Rationality tried to intervene. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe Maya simply resembled his daughter by chance. After all, there were millions of children in the world. But something deeper, something that defied logic, refused to let the thought go. Could Maya be the baby he was told had died? The possibility felt absurd, yet he couldn't dismiss it. Not when every instinct inside him screamed that she was connected to him in a way no stranger ever could be. He thought back to that night at the hospital, to the hurried apologies, the vague explanations, the way they never showed him the child, never gave him a moment to hold her, to say goodbye. They just told him she was gone and expected him to move on. What if it was a lie, a mistake? Or worse, what if someone had chosen to make her disappear? He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees, and buried his face in his hands. The weight of not knowing pressed against his chest like a stone. If Maya was truly his daughter, his lost child, then someone had stolen 13 years from both of them. 13 birthdays, 13 first days of school, 13 nights of stories and lullabies. The thought made his throat tighten. He had to find out the truth. Not tomorrow. Not next week. Now. Because if there was even the slightest chance Maya was his, he could not afford to ignore it. Not again. Marcus Bennett wasn't just Daniel's oldest friend. He was his legal compass, the one person Daniel trusted to cut through noise and emotion with logic and precision. When Daniel called him 2 days after Maya arrived, there was no hesitation. Marcus showed up, that same afternoon, briefcase in hand, and concern etched into his usually unreadable face. Daniel didn't waste time with pleasantries. He handed Marcus a cotton swab quietly taken from Maya's used spoon and a separate sample from Chloe's hairbrush. No explanations, just a single sentence I need. Answers, not judgment. Marcus didn't ask questions, not then. But he saw something in Daniel's eyes that unsettled him. Within 48 hours, the test results came back. Marcus stood in Daniel's office, a sealed envelope in one hand, his phone in the other. He didn't sit, didn't smile, just cleared his throat and said, "You need to hear this." Daniel's heart pounded against his ribs as Marcus unfolded the page. The DNA analysis shows a 99.7% match between Maya and both Chloe and Riley. Statistically, that level of similarity is only possible in full siblings, identical paternity and maternity. The words hit Daniel like a tidal wave, violent, undeniable. He'd prepared himself for doubt, maybe for not quite, but not for certainty. Full siblings, not cousins, not distant relatives. Blood, flesh, family. Marcus let the silence hang for a moment before adding, "Daniel, there's no mistake here. Maya is your daughter. She's Elena's daughter. Daniel sank into the nearest chair, breathless. The ground beneath him felt unstable, as if the foundation of his entire life had shifted by a few inches. And yet the truth had never felt so heavy, so real. 13 years of not knowing. One test, one result. Everything had changed. Marcus wasn't one to jump to conclusions, but the DNA result had rattled even him. He immediately launched into the second layer of investigation, tracking hospital records, delivery logs, and birth registrations from the night Elena Whitaker gave birth. It should have been straightforward. Daniel's twin daughters were both officially documented: Chloe Whitaker 2:14 a.m., Riley Whitaker 2:16 a.m. The records included birth weights, APGAR scores, even the names of the attending physicians and nurses. But when Marcus searched for any mention of a third infant, he hit a wall of silence. No third fetus was listed in the OBGYN report. No neonatal resuscitation logs. No death certificate. No stillbirth notation. Nothing. It was as if the child had never existed. On paper, Elena had delivered 2 healthy girls, and that was the end of the story. But Marcus knew better. He dug deeper, requesting archived delivery room surveillance footage from that night. The hospital's legal department responded with a standard line: "Due to technical limitations, footage from that date is no longer available." He wasn't surprised. He then examined staff rosters and found something curious. 2 nurses who had been present that night had resigned within weeks of the delivery. One of them had since passed away in a car accident. The other had moved across the country and left no forwarding address. It wasn't coincidence. It was a trail, one that had been carefully obscured. When Marcus relayed the findings to Daniel, he didn't sugarcoat the truth. There is no third baby in the system. No record. No footprint. No file. It's not just missing, it was never there to begin with. Someone deliberately erased her. Daniel stared at him, stunned. Erased. The word echoed in his mind like a scream in a canyon. Someone had taken his daughter not just from his arms, but from history itself. Daniel paced the length of his study, like a man trapped in a nightmare he couldn't wake from. The room felt smaller by the minute, the walls too close, the silence too loud. Marcus's words kept circling in his head. She was never in the system. That fact alone was devastating, but it was the implication behind it that truly chilled him. This wasn't a clerical error. It wasn't the result of overwhelmed staff or a chaotic delivery night. It was deliberate. Someone had made the conscious choice to delete all evidence of Maya's birth before she even had a chance to take her first breath in the world. Daniel collapsed into his chair. Fingers threaded through his hair, trying to steady the storm brewing in his chest. Hospitals didn't just lose records. Not of newborns. Not in high-profile cases involving wealthy, well-connected families like his. The Whitaker name alone ensured top-tier attention. And yet no paper trail. No incident report. No medical file indicating complications. It meant someone had access. Someone trusted enough to move inside the system invisible and remove a child like she was never meant to exist. He began tracing possibilities. A corrupt staff member, a black market adoption ring, a revenge scheme. But nothing explained why Maya would end up being raised by an elderly woman with no connection to his family in a town 200 miles away under the radar for 13 years. Unless the plan had never been about profit or ransom. What if it was about erasure? About making sure this child never came back? The thought curdled in his stomach. Who would do that, and why? Daniel stood staring out the window into the night, the city lights blinking like quiet warnings. Whoever did this hadn't made a mistake. They made a choice. A choice to erase his daughter, and now he would make it his mission to uncover every name behind that decision, no matter the cost. Daniel couldn't sleep. The house was quiet, too quiet, and every creak of the floorboards, every shift of the wind outside the window seemed amplified in his restless mind. He sat in his study once again, papers spread across the desk. Hospital records, fragments of timelines, and Maya's newly printed DNA result lying at the center like a glowing wound. The more he stared, the more the question took hold, burrowing deep like a splinter he couldn't reach. Who did this and why? The list of possibilities was short, but chilling. It had to be someone with access, Someone who could move through medical systems undetected, who could alter birth records, suppress death reports, and disappear a baby without triggering alarms. That level of access didn't belong to a single rogue nurse. It suggested something more organized, more calculated. But the most disturbing part wasn't the how. It was the why. Why would anyone want to steal a newborn from a high-profile family like his, only to hide her away without ransom, without demands, without any sign of leverage? If it had been revenge, why not come forward? If it had been money, why let the child vanish into obscurity, living in poverty with an elderly caretaker? Unless... Daniel's breath caught. Unless the goal was never to benefit from Maya, but to eliminate her. Not by murder, but by erasure. To make her invisible, a secret swept under the rug before it could ever become a scandal. But what kind of scandal could a newborn possibly represent? His mind reeled through old memories, corporate rivals, medical foundations, Elena's complicated family history. He thought about the doctor who'd delivered the girls. Was he still alive? Still practicing? The silence surrounding Maya's absence was beginning to feel less like negligence and more like a conspiracy. Someone had something to gain from her disappearance. And now that she was back, someone might have something to lose. Marcus's investigation took him deeper into the fragments of Maya's past, and the further he looked, the more disturbing the pattern became. Through a combination of hospital employment logs, payroll records, and archived staff photos, he finally uncovered a name that had remained hidden beneath layers of outdated data: Lorraine Hargrove. The name meant nothing to Daniel at first until Marcus pointed to a small line in a 13-year-old staff schedule. Lorraine Hargrove had been a night shift nurse at St. Aurelia Medical Center. Her final shift. The very night Elena Whitaker gave birth. Daniel felt the blood drain from his face. Lorraine had disappeared from the hospital's records just 3 days after the delivery, marked as voluntary resignation with no exit interview, no forwarding address, and no formal file explaining her sudden departure. But it didn't end there. Further digging revealed that Lorraine had quietly moved to a rural town nearly 200 miles away, purchased a small cottage in cash under a different surname, and adopted a baby girl without paperwork, without any formal custody process. The baby, of course, was Maya. A neighbor had described Lorraine as kind but reclusive, a woman who rarely left home except to shop or attend the occasional church gathering. She homeschooled the child, told locals that Maya had no living relatives, and claimed to have found her abandoned at birth. The story had never been questioned until now. Daniel sat in stunned silence as Marcus relayed each detail. Lorraine wasn't just some good Samaritan who had stumbled upon a forgotten child. She had been there in that delivery room. She had access, and she had motive. Whether she acted alone or as part of something larger remained unclear. But one truth cut through all the shadows: Lorraine Hargrove had taken his daughter and built a life on a lie. The deeper Marcus dug, the darker the truth became. It began with anomalies, missing neonatal files, unexplained staff resignations, falsified death reports. But soon those fragments started pointing to something far more sinister: a hidden network operating within the shadows of the healthcare system. Through encrypted legal databases, whistleblower reports, and sealed court testimonies, Marcus uncovered the existence of a covert ring that specialized in one horrific service: erasing newborn identities. They called themselves the Silent Hand, a loosely organized group of rogue medical personnel, hospital administrators, and forged adoption intermediaries who operated across several states. Their method was precise and chilling. Identify vulnerable births, usually unregistered third multiples, babies born to unconscious or unaware mothers, or infants presumed dead in chaotic delivery circumstances. Then, without a trace, the baby's records would be deleted or never created to begin with. No footprints, no certificates, no trace. These erased children were then handed off not for profit, as one might expect, but as favors. Tokens exchanged within elite circles. Some went to wealthy families who had trouble conceiving, others to high-ranking officials or medical insiders who wanted a child without legal entanglements. In most cases, the birth parents never knew, or worse, were told the child had died. Marcus's voice shook when he explained it to Daniel, not out of fear, but fury. "This isn't just a single act of cruelty," he said. "It's a system, quiet, deliberate, and designed to reward those who ask no questions." Lorraine Hargrove had been part of it. Whether by ideology, desperation, or coercion, she had taken Maya and vanished. But unlike most stories in this ring, Maya hadn't disappeared forever. She had returned, living proof that the system had failed to bury every secret. And now that Daniel knew the truth, silence was no longer an option. This wasn't just about Maya anymore. It was about exposing the machine that stole her life and making sure it never happened again. Daniel had hoped naively, perhaps, that bringing Maya home would mark the beginning of healing. That once she was safe under his roof, the nightmare would slowly dissolve into memory. But reality offered no such peace. Within a week of Maya's return, strange things began happening, subtle at first, but unmistakable to a man whose instincts had been sharpened by years of boardroom battles and political landmines. A black SUV parked across the street 3 nights in a row, never moving engine, idling for hours. An anonymous call to CPS reporting an unregistered minor in the Whitaker residence. An unfamiliar man in a lab coat spotted near Maya's school claiming to be a pediatrician from the Department of Health, yet no such appointment had ever been scheduled. Marcus was the first to say it out loud. They know she's back. The very organization they had begun to expose. The silent hand had clearly taken notice. Maya's reappearance posed a threat to their secrecy. She was living proof of their operations, a breathing contradiction to their erased histories. And now in the digital age, a single photograph, a single test result, could shatter the web they had spent years weaving. Daniel felt the old coldness return, the calculated calm that had once helped him dismantle billion-dollar empires. But this wasn't a hostile takeover. This was his daughter's life. He began to notice how Maya flinched at the sound of doors opening too fast, how she checked the locks twice before bed, how her eyes scanned faces in every public space. She didn't know who to fear, only that she'd been taught to fear. And now, unknowingly, she had become a target once more. Bringing her home had made her visible again. And in doing so, Daniel had pulled her into the crosshairs of the very people who once tried to erase her. This time they wouldn't make the same mistake. But neither would he. The envelope arrived without a return address, slid beneath the heavy oak front door in the dead of night. No knock, no footsteps, just silence, and the chill that came with it. Daniel found it early the next morning, just after making coffee, resting squarely on the welcome mat as if it had been placed with deliberate precision. The paper was cream-colored, thick, expensive, inside a single sheet. No signature, no letterhead, no trace of its origin. Only one sentence typed in bold black ink. "If you continue to dig, the girl won't be safe." Daniel stared at the words, a cold wave of fury rising through his chest. It wasn't just a threat, it was a declaration. A line in the sand drawn by people who believed they were still untouchable. People who had once erased a child from the world and were now warning him not to interfere with that silence. He read the sentence again slowly, carefully, trying to decipher any hint of tone or clue that might reveal who had written it. There was none. Just brutal simplicity. A message written by someone who didn't bluff. Someone who believed he would be afraid. But Daniel wasn't the same man he had been 13 years ago. Back then he had accepted what he was told, trusted the system, believed the lie. But not now. Now he had a face, a name, a daughter who slept just down the hall with a soft toy gripped in her hand and a scar behind her ear that she didn't know how she got. He folded the letter slowly and placed it inside the safe behind his bookshelf, not out of fear, but as evidence. Proof. A warning that they were watching. But they had made one fatal error: they threatened a father. And there is nothing more dangerous than a father who has already lost his child once and refuses to lose her again. The storm had been brewing for days, subtle at first, missed glances, forced smiles, the quiet way Chloe had begun to excuse herself from dinner earlier than usual. Daniel had sensed it, of course, but he had hoped it was just an adjustment period, a natural reaction to the upheaval Maya's presence had brought into their once predictable home. But on that Wednesday evening, the storm finally broke. It started with something small Maya had asked to sit in the armchair Chloe usually claimed during movie nights. Daniel, distracted, had said, "Sure, sweetheart," let her without thinking. That one sentence unraveled everything. Chloe stood arms crossed, her voice sharp and shaking. "Of course. Let her. Why not? She gets everything now, doesn't she?" The room went silent. Riley looked up, wide-eyed. Maya froze a half-eaten cookie in her hand. Daniel turned toward his daughter, confused. "Chloe, what are you talking about?" Chloe's voice cracked as the words tumbled out louder, faster, each one more jagged than the last. "She's living in Mom's old room. She gets your attention. She gets Marcus coming over every day. Everyone's acting like she's this miracle. But what about us? What about me? Do I not matter anymore because I was lucky enough to grow up here?" Maya's eyes dropped to the floor, shrinking into the cushion. Riley tried to interject, but Daniel raised a hand, heart pounding. "Chloe, that's not fair." "No, what's not fair is that one day we stop at a gas station, and suddenly I'm not your daughter anymore. I'm just the girl who got here first." The words hung in the air like shattered glass. Chloe's anger wasn't just about a chair. It was about displacement, about fear, about identity. Daniel felt it heavy and raw. This wasn't just a rescue. It was a collision, and the fallout had only begun. While Chloe stormed out, slamming the door to her room with the kind of finality only a hurt teenager could muster, Riley remained seated at the kitchen table, her eyes still fixed on Maya, who now looked impossibly small, her shoulders hunched, hands folded in her lap, as if trying to disappear into the chair. The silence lingered, tense and brittle. Daniel started to speak, but Riley gently shook her head. "Let me," she whispered. She crossed the room slowly, then knelt in front of Maya, who still wouldn't meet her gaze. "Hey," Riley said softly. "It's okay. She didn't mean all of that. Not really." Maya shook her head. "Yes, she did," she mumbled, voice barely audible. "She's right. I don't belong here." Riley paused, then said something even Daniel hadn't expected. "I used to feel that way too." Maya glanced up, startled. Riley's face was calm, but solemn eyes older than her years. "When Mom died, I felt like a ghost in this house. Chloe had her ways of coping, and Dad had his. But me, I used to sit at the bottom of the stairs after everyone was asleep, just hoping someone would notice I hadn't gone to bed. Sometimes I'd cry so quietly just to see if anyone would come." Her voice trembled, but she didn't look away. "No one did. Not because they didn't love me, but because they didn't see me the way I needed to be seen. I know what it's like to feel like the extra person in the room, the one who arrived too late." Maya blinked rapidly, trying to hold back tears. Riley offered a faint smile. "But you're not too late. Not here. Not with me." She reached out, and Maya, after a moment's hesitation, took her hand. Daniel watched from across the room, a lump rising in his throat. In that quiet gesture amidst the wreckage of Chloe's anger, something fragile and necessary had begun to take root, understanding. Daniel sat alone in the darkened living room, the glow of the fireplace throwing restless shadows across the floor. Upstairs, silence blanketed the house, Chloe shut away behind her door. Riley asleep with her headphones on, and Maya curled up in the guest room that now felt less and less like a temporary space. But Daniel couldn't rest. His thoughts pulled him in opposite directions. Two truths colliding with equal weight: the responsibility to protect the daughter he'd just found, and the duty to preserve the fragile piece of the family he had spent years building from the ruins of loss. Every time he saw Maya's eyes, so familiar, so haunting, it awakened something raw and instinctual in him. She was his child, flesh of his flesh. And yet she was also a stranger to his other daughters, a disruption they never asked for. Chloe's outburst hadn't been about selfishness. It had been about fear. Fear of losing her place. Fear of being replaced in a world already full of grief. And Riley, while kind and empathetic, was still navigating her own quiet wounds. Introducing Maya into their lives had reignited unspoken tensions Daniel thought they had all moved past. Now everything felt exposed again, vulnerable. He wanted to believe he could hold all three close without anyone getting hurt. But each day the pressure mounted. Every decision he made in Maya's favor seemed to echo in Chloe's silence. Every act of reassurance toward his twins felt like a betrayal of Maya's fragility. How could he choose between children? How could any father weigh one daughter's safety against another's sense of belonging? His chest ached with the impossible burden of love divided. He closed his eyes, gripping the armrest tightly, whispering into the stillness, "How do I protect one without losing the others?" And the silence for now offered no answer. Daniel stood at the threshold of Maya's room, watching her sleep in the soft wash of moonlight filtering through the window. Her breathing was steady now, but her small frame curled inward, like she was still bracing for the world to hurt her again. He stepped inside quietly, each footstep measured, and sat on the edge of the bed without waking her. For a moment he just looked at her, this girl who had changed everything without asking who had arrived. Like a question the universe had finally remembered to answer. He hadn't intended to say anything aloud, but the words rose from somewhere too deep to ignore. "If you're my daughter," he whispered, voice thick, trembling, "then you need to know something right now." Maya stirred slightly, eyes fluttering open in a daze. She blinked up at him, confused, vulnerable. Daniel leaned in just enough that she could see the raw honesty in his face. "If you're my daughter," he repeated, "then I will never let you go again. Never." His voice cracked, but he didn't hide it. "They took you from me once, whoever they are, whatever their reasons were, they erased you from everything. And I didn't even know I'd lost you. But now I do. And I swear to you, Maya, I will not lose you again." Maya's lips parted, a breath caught in her throat. No one had ever said words like that to her before. Words that didn't ask, didn't demand, just promised. She didn't answer at first, only stared like she was trying to believe this moment was real. And Daniel didn't rush her. He reached for her hand slowly, gently, and held it like it was the most sacred thing in the world. "You're not alone anymore. You never will be. Not while I'm still breathing." The storm arrived sometime after midnight, not outside, but within the walls of Daniel's home. He woke to a strange stillness, the kind that prickled the skin as if something vital had shifted. It wasn't until he passed Maya's room on the way to the kitchen that the unease crystallized. Her door was slightly ajar, the bed neatly made, untouched. For a second he convinced himself she might just be in the bathroom or downstairs. But when he checked, each room echoed with emptiness. Panic tightened in his chest. On the desk by the window, folded with deliberate care, was a piece of notebook paper creased once down the middle, her name scrawled across the front in shaky, almost childlike handwriting. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened it. The message inside was heartbreakingly simple. "Don't look for me. I'm sorry. This isn't my home. Thank you for trying. Please let me go. No signature. No explanation. Just absence. Just loss." He sank into the nearest chair, the letter still in his hands, his mind already racing through worst-case scenarios. Had someone contacted her, threatened her, or had the weight of everything, Chloe's resentment, the trauma she couldn't yet name, the pressure of being found finally pushed her past what she could bear. Upstairs, Riley's door creaked open. She took one look at his face, then the empty hallway, and understood. "She's gone," she asked, voice cracking. Daniel could only nod, unable to speak past the knot in his throat. He had promised to protect Maya, sworn he wouldn't lose her again. And now she had slipped away in the night, not by force but by choice. That was somehow worse, because it meant she still didn't believe she belonged. Not really, not yet. And now the question wasn't just where she had gone, but whether she'd ever believe she deserved to come back. By dawn, the house was in motion. Daniel hadn't slept a minute. The note still sat on the kitchen table, its quiet finality gnawing at him with every passing second. Maya was out there alone, scared and convinced that she was safer without them. He refused to accept that. Not again. Not this time. Marcus arrived before sunrise, his tie still loose, coffee in one hand, and a grim look on his face. He didn't waste time asking for details. He read the note once, glanced at Daniel's hollow expression, and nodded. "We'll find her. They began with what little they had: Maya's phone. She hadn't used it in over a day, and the GPS had been turned off, but Marcus had contacts in cybersecurity, old clients from legal battles past. One call a favor, and a trace was initiated. It wasn't a real-time signal, but a fragment of hope. The last known ping placed her somewhere just outside of Ashford, a small town off the interstate, roughly 80 miles south. Daniel didn't hesitate. Within minutes, they were on the road, Daniel gripping the steering wheel like a lifeline, eyes burning from exhaustion and fear. Why Ashford? He muttered more to himself than Marcus. She doesn't know anyone there. Marcus stared out the window thinking, maybe she's not going to someone. Maybe she's going back to something. Familiar streets, a safe hiding place. Somewhere she remembers feeling invisible. That thought chilled Daniel. Was she trying to vanish again, to slip back into the shadow life that had taught her never to expect love or safety or permanence? He pushed the car faster. Highway signs blurred past, but nothing else mattered. Not work, not reputation, only her. We're not just finding her, Daniel said, voice tight with purpose. We're bringing her home. Marcus glanced at him, then nodded. Even if she doesn't know it's home yet. The truck stop was small, tucked just off a lonely stretch of highway, surrounded by open fields and flickering neon signs. Daniel's headlights swept across the cracked pavement as he pulled into the parking lot, his heart pounding like a war drum. The place looked deserted, save for a few idling semis and a weary-looking cashier behind the glass of the convenience store. It was Marcus who saw her first. There, he said quietly, pointing toward a dimly lit corner near a row of vending machines. Daniel turned and froze. Huddled on a bench, knees pulled tight to her chest, was Maya. She wore the same hoodie she had left in sleeves too long for her arms, the hood drawn over her head, as if it could shield her from everything. In her lap sat a faded, worn-out teddy bear, its fur matted, one eye missing stuffing, peeking through a tear near the seam. She clutched it, like it was the last piece of safety in the world. Daniel stepped out of the car, slowly, not wanting to startle her. The air was cold, but sweat beaded at his temples. As he approached, the crunch of gravel under his shoes made her flinch. She looked up. Their eyes met. For a moment, neither of them moved. Maya's expression was unreadable, part fear, part disbelief, part something achingly close to shame. Daniel dropped to one knee, keeping his voice steady and low. You don't have to run, sweetheart. Not from me. Maya's lips trembled, and she gripped the teddy bear tighter. I thought maybe it would be easier. For everyone. Daniel shook his head, swallowing hard. No, it's never easier without you. Not once. Not ever. Tears welled in her eyes, and for the first time she let them fall. Daniel opened his arms, not as a demand, but as an invitation. And after a heartbeat that stretched for eternity, Maya leaned forward and collapsed into him, burying her face in his chest. The teddy bear tumbled to the ground as he wrapped his arms around her, holding her like he would never let go again. Daniel held Maya in his arms, the weight of her trembling body anchoring him to the moment in a way nothing else ever had. The chill of the night disappeared, replaced by the warmth of her presence and the slow, aching thud of her heartbeat against his chest. She didn't speak. And he didn't rush her. He just held her, one hand cradling the back of her head, the other around her shoulders like a shield he should have built years ago. After a while, her sobs began to quiet, replaced by shallow breaths and the sound of trucks rumbling in the distance. She finally pulled back slightly, her eyes, red-rimmed cheeks streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, voice cracking. I didn't mean to scare you. I didn't know how to stay. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, his own eyes glassy, his jaw tight with all the things he'd never gotten the chance to say. And then softly but clearly he spoke. No, sweetheart. I'm the one who should be sorry. I should have been there the moment you came into this world. I should have known. I should have fought harder, asked more questions, never accepted what they told me. You were taken from me, and I let the silence bury that truth for 13 years. That's on me. Not you. Maya blinked, stunned by the reversal. He continued, voice thick but unwavering. You don't owe me an apology, Maya. You didn't choose this. But I have a choice now, and I choose you. Every day. Forever. Her lower lip quivered, and she stared at him like she was seeing him for the first time, even after everything she asked. Daniel nodded, especially after everything. He gently brushed a strand of hair from her face. Because I'm not just your father when it's easy. I'm your father, period. And I'm so sorry I didn't find you sooner. Marcus knew from the beginning that this battle wouldn't be won in the shadows. The silent hand operated precisely because no one dared drag them into the light, and that's exactly what he intended to do. The morning after Maya was found, he sat at his desk, sleeves rolled up, eyes bloodshot from a night of compiling evidence. Dozens of files, medical logs, witness statements, and internal hospital communications had been laid bare piece by piece, revealing the rot beneath the polished surface of an industry meant to heal. It wasn't just about Maya anymore. She was one of dozens, perhaps hundreds, whose names had been erased, whose identities had been stolen, traded, or buried. Marcus drafted the initial complaint with surgical precision, naming not just individuals but systems. The suit targeted the network itself, a series of shell companies that funneled forged adoption papers through legal loopholes, a handful of hospital executives who signed off on falsified death records, and former staff members like Lorraine Hargrove, who were complicit in the silent disappearance of newborns. Daniel reviewed the draft, his hands trembling slightly as he signed the affidavit. "We exposed them all," he said. "Every last one." Marcus nodded, already anticipating the storm that would follow. This wasn't just a lawsuit, it was a declaration of war against an invisible enemy who thrived on secrecy. They filed in federal court under the whistleblower statute, triggering immediate interest from multiple agencies. The media got wind within hours. Headlines blared, black market adoptions, the hospital scandal. No one saw coming. Marcus knew the road ahead would be brutal. The defendants were powerful, well-connected, and willing to do anything to stay hidden. But they had made one critical mistake. They underestimated the fury of a father and the resolve of a lawyer who had nothing left to fear. This case wasn't about winning. It was about justice. And justice finally had a name. Maya. The courthouse was modest, nestled between a library and a post office in a quiet suburban district far from the flash of major media outlets. No flashing cameras lined the sidewalk, no reporters shouting questions. From the outside, it looked like any other sleepy municipal building. But inside, a storm of reckoning was quietly unfolding. The courtroom itself was small, just a dozen pew-like benches, a worn wooden floor, and a single American flag leaning slightly in its stand behind the judge's bench. Yet the air was heavy, charged with the weight of years stolen and truths suppressed. Daniel sat in the front row, Maya beside him, her fingers laced tightly in his. She wore a simple blue dress, her hair pulled back, and a necklace Riley had given her that morning, a token of sisterhood now reclaimed. Chloe and Riley sat just behind them, silent and watchful. This was not a trial meant for headlines. It was a preliminary hearing, procedural and restrained. But for the family sitting there, it was nothing short of seismic. Marcus stood with quiet fire in his voice, laying out the case. No theatrics, just facts raw and undeniable. He spoke of altered records of stolen children, of Lorraine Hargrove's direct role, and the system that allowed it to happen. As he spoke, Maya looked down her thumb, tracing the edge of a scar on her wrist she didn't remember getting. She wasn't on trial, but the courtroom seemed to echo with every piece of her stolen childhood. When the judge asked if the plaintiff wished to make a statement, Daniel stood. His voice shook, not with fear, but with fury, barely restrained by love. "This isn't about one child," he said, his hand gently squeezing Maya's. "This is about every child who was silenced before they had a voice. Today, we speak for them all." And the room, small as it was, held its breath. The judge called her name gently, not with authority, but with a certain softness that acknowledged the weight of what she was about to do. Maya stood slowly, hands trembling at her sides, then walked to the front of the courtroom with hesitant but deliberate steps. Her frame looked small behind the witness stand, dwarfed by the wooden podium and towering shelves of legal volumes. But when she spoke, her voice, though quiet, carried with startling clarity. "My name is Maya Whitaker." She began, the surname new on her tongue, still unfamiliar, but spoken with pride. "I don't have a birth certificate. I don't know what time I was born. I don't know who held me first. For 13 years, I thought maybe I wasn't supposed to exist." She paused, glancing briefly at Daniel, then back at the judge. "I'm not here to punish anyone. I'm not here to get revenge. I'm here because someone decided my life didn't matter, not enough to be counted, to be recorded, to be remembered. I was just erased." The room had fallen utterly silent. Even the hum of the fluorescent lights seemed to fade. But I survived. I made myself small for a long time. I learned to speak quietly, not to take up space. I told myself if I asked for too much, I'd be taken away again. She looked down at her clasped hands, then back up, her voice steadier now. "But I don't want much. I never did. I just want to exist in a way that's real. I want to know I was born, that I belong, that when I look in the mirror, I'm not just a secret someone kept." Her eyes began to shimmer, but she didn't cry. "I want a name that isn't whispered, a birthday that isn't a mystery, a family that isn't afraid to claim me out loud." Then she stepped down, head high, her silence broken not by force but by choice. And for the first time, Maya didn't just survive the courtroom. She owned it. When the judge returned to the bench after a short recess, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. Maya sat between Daniel and Riley, her shoulders tense, eyes fixed on the polished floor as if bracing for disappointment. Daniel reached over and gently placed his hand on hers, not as a reassurance, but as a bond, unspoken and unbreakable. The judge adjusted his glasses, glanced briefly at the file in front of him, and then looked directly at Maya. "This court has reviewed the submitted documentation, medical evidence, the plaintiff's sworn testimony, and the statements provided today. We have found no record of a birth certificate, nor any official record that reflects your existence under state law for the past 13 years. But," he said, pausing deliberately, "that ends today." The silence fractured, replaced by the quiet gasps of those seated behind. Maya's breath caught in her throat. "It is the decision of this court to formally re-establish your legal identity. Effective immediately, your name shall be restored as Maya Eleonora Whitaker. You will be issued a legal birth certificate, state ID, and all records due to you as a citizen and as a daughter." His voice softened almost imperceptibly. "You were never invisible. You were stolen, and the law will not fail you again." A tear slid down Maya's cheek before she could stop it, and Daniel pulled her into his arms this time, not out of fear of losing her, but in celebration of finally, fully having her back. Riley reached across the seat and squeezed Maya's hand. Even Chloe, seated quietly behind, wiped at her eyes. It wasn't just a legal ruling. It was a resurrection. A life returned to the world with the full weight of truth behind it. For the first time in her life, Maya was no longer a shadow. She was real, seen, named, and home. The day they picked up Maya's official birth certificate was unusually quiet, as if even the world had paused to honor what was being restored. The courthouse clerk handed Daniel a cream-colored envelope with a gold seal pressed into the corner, and inside was something more sacred than any title, diploma, or legal deed he had ever held, a name finally etched into the world with permanence. Maya Elena Whitaker. Each word carried weight. Maya, the name she had always clung to despite having no one to affirm it. Elena, chosen by Daniel not just to honor her mother, but to link past to present, to say what was once broken could be named and remembered. And Whitaker, the family name, once incomplete, now whole. Daniel let Maya open it herself. Her hands were steady but slow, reverent. When she saw the name printed at the top in bold black ink, her breath caught audibly. There it was, real, legal, hers. For the first time, she didn't feel like a secret someone forgot to claim. She was someone's daughter on paper and in truth. "It's official," Daniel said quietly, kneeling beside her chair. "The world knows what I've always known, you belong here." Maya blinked, then nodded. "Can I frame it?" she asked, her voice small but sure. Daniel smiled. "We'll hang it right next to Chloe and Riley's. No longer an asterisk. No longer a shadow. Just a name, a full, rightful name protected by ink law and love. That certificate wasn't just a document. It was a vow. A quiet but thunderous declaration: Maya Elena Whitaker exists, and she always will. The moving truck rumbled up the winding road, its tires kicking up dust as the Whitakers approached the hilltop property that would become their new beginning. The house stood quietly against the sky, nestled just beyond a grove of tall pines, its white-painted porch gleaming in the afternoon sun. Lavender spilled from balcony planters in soft purple cascades swaying gently in the breeze like welcome banners. It wasn't the largest house Daniel had ever owned, nor the most luxurious, but it was the only one that had been chosen with healing in mind. This wasn't a place for show. It was a place to exhale, to rebuild, to belong. As the family stepped out of the car, Maya was the first to run up the steps, her fingers brushing the railing lined with climbing ivy. She paused at the threshold, not quite ready to go in, just staring at the front door like it was the final portal into a world that finally wanted her. Riley came up behind her and nudged her shoulder. "It's okay," she said, grinning. "It's ours." Chloe, quieter, hung back by the truck, but even she couldn't hide the softness in her eyes as she watched Maya reach for the doorknob. Inside the rooms smelled of fresh paint and sun-warmed wood. A soft wind carried the scent of lavender in through open windows, mixing with laughter and the clatter of boxes being unpacked. There was a reading nook Maya had already claimed, a shared study the girls would decorate together, and a kitchen with enough space for family dinners and second chances. Daniel stood at the doorway for a moment, just watching. This house wasn't just a structure. It was proof that after years of silence, something whole could be built again. Not perfect, but full of light. And finally theirs. The late afternoon sun poured golden light over the lavender-lined balcony as Daniel adjusted the camera on the tripod, setting the timer with careful precision. "All right, everyone," he called, trying to sound casual, though his voice betrayed a tremor of emotion. "Let's make it official." Chloe and Riley exchanged a glance, both half smiling, half eye-rolling, in the way only sisters do, but they stepped forward anyway. Maya stood in the center, unsure at first where to place her hands, how to hold her body. She had never been in a family photo before, at least not one where she belonged. But Daniel motioned gently for her to come closer. Riley took one side, slipping her arm around Maya's shoulder, and Chloe, a little more reluctant, but no less sincere, placed her hand lightly on Maya's back. Daniel moved in beside them, towering behind his daughters like a quiet pillar, resting a hand on each twin's shoulder. Maya was in the middle, not just physically, but symbolically. For once, she wasn't on the edge, fading into the background. She was the heartbeat of the picture. The camera clicked, a soft beep, then a shudder. And just like that, the image was captured, not just light and color, but something far more fragile, proof of presence, of belonging, of wholeness. Maya blinked against the light and looked up at Daniel, who smiled through glassy eyes. "That's going in the living room," he said, voice thick with quiet joy. Maya looked at the photo preview on the screen, her in the center, flanked by sisters wrapped in arms that no longer felt hesitant. And for the first time in her life, she saw herself not as someone extra, not as someone lost, but as someone placed. Deliberately, proudly, loved. A family of 4, whole at last. The living room had finally settled into quiet after a day of moving, unpacking, and laughter echoing through freshly painted halls. Soft amber light spilled in through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced slowly in the warm air. In the center of the room, above the mantel carved from reclaimed oak, hung a single framed photo, simple, unadorned, yet impossibly full. It was the picture they had taken just days ago out on the lavender balcony. The 4 of them, Daniel, Chloe, Riley, and Maya, standing shoulder to shoulder, no one posed, no one perfect, but each face caught in a moment of unguarded truth. Maya stood slightly off-center in the photo, but her presence anchored the image. She wasn't just included, she was part of the foundation. Now standing before it in silence, the family gathered, as if drawn by some unspoken gravity. No one said a word. They didn't need to. Daniel's arm rested lightly around Maya's shoulder. Riley stood beside them with a quiet smile tugging at her lips. and even Chloe's arms folded and head tilted slightly, wore a look not of resistance but of quiet acceptance. The silence stretched, not heavy but sacred. In that stillness there was no need to explain the journey that had brought them to this house, to this photo, to this fragile but unbreakable bond. Each of them carried different wounds, different memories, but for this one moment they stood as a single unit, rooted not in blood or perfection, but in choice. The photo was more than an image. It was a symbol, a declaration, a promise. That healing was possible. That family could be chosen, reclaimed, rebuilt. And as the light shifted, casting golden edges around the frame, the Whitakers stood in that quiet space between grief and grace, no longer defined by what they had lost, but by what they had dared to rebuild. Together. Dinner that evening was the kind of quiet miracle Daniel had once stopped believing in. The table was nothing grand, just a warm pine rectangle worn soft at the edges from years of use, centered in a kitchen that still smelled faintly of fresh paint and lavender from the open windows. There were no speeches, no dramatic announcements, no emotional outbursts. Just 4 chairs, filled 4 plates, passed, and the simple rhythm of a family, finally learning to breathe in sync. Maya sat to Daniel's left, twirling her spaghetti slowly, a small smile tugging at the corners of her mouth. Across from her, Riley was animated mid-story about something that had happened on the drive, how a raccoon had startled them when it darted in front of the moving truck, and how Marcus nearly spilled his coffee. Chloe, sitting beside her, actually laughed real laughter, not the guarded kind she'd used in recent months. Maya looked up at the sound, blinking in surprise before letting out a soft laugh of her own, as if checking whether it was okay to join in. Daniel caught her eye and gave her a subtle nod, not one of approval, but of recognition. You're here. You're safe. You're ours. The clinking of forks against ceramic, the scrape of serving spoons in bowls, and the soft hum of music playing from a phone in the corner filled the room in place of words they didn't need to speak. For the first time in what felt like years, Daniel wasn't watching his daughters for signs of strain, wasn't weighing every gesture or word. Tonight, there was no awkward pause, no tension beneath the surface, just presence, just warmth, a moment unspoiled by grief or memory. When dessert came, a store-bought apple pie, Riley insisted on heating up. Maya was the first to grab a second slice to everyone's amused surprise. Daniel leaned back in his chair, heart full, and watched them. There was no ceremonial toast, no declaration of new beginnings, just the clatter of forks, bursts of laughter, and the shared unspoken agreement that they were finally becoming whole. This wasn't a celebration. It was something better, peace. As the evening settled into a soft hum, Daniel found himself leaning back in his chair, letting the warm cadence of laughter and clinking dishes wash over him like a song he hadn't heard in years. The overhead light cast a golden glow across the table, catching flecks of color in the girls' hair, warming their faces, softening the edges of the past. He didn't speak. He didn't move. He simply watched. And in that stillness, something inside him shifted. His eyes moved slowly, deliberately from one daughter to the next. Riley, bright and expressive, was leaning over her plate, telling a story with her hands, as much as her words, always needing to explain every detail, always needing to make others feel what she felt. Chloe, seated beside her, was quieter, but not distant. She was listening with that thoughtful focus only she possessed, lips curled slightly at the corners, in a way that said she was enjoying the moment, even if she wouldn't say so aloud. And then there was Maya, his miracle. Sitting between them as if she'd always belonged, her posture no longer guarded, her eyes no longer wary. She laughed at Riley's jokes, now nodded at Chloe's dry observations, reached for the water pitcher without hesitation. She was present, not hovering at the edges, not waiting to be sent away. Present. And Daniel, watching all 3 of them beneath that soft kitchen light, felt something he hadn't let himself feel in a very long time, peace. Not the fleeting kind. Not the performance of peace, but the real, heavy, silent kind that settles in your bones when you finally realize you're exactly where you're supposed to be. He smiled. It wasn't big, wasn't theatrical. Just a quiet curve at the edge of his mouth. The kind of smile a man wears when he knows he's witnessing something sacred and doesn't want to disturb it. 3 daughters, 1 table, One chance he almost didn't get, but now would never let go of. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. In that pause between moments, Daniel simply smiled and silently gave thanks for the life that had been broken, found, and finally made whole again. The laughter slowly faded into a comfortable quiet, the kind that didn't ask to be filled. The plates had been cleared, the last crumbs of pie eaten, and now the four of them lingered around the table, not from obligation, but from the rare joy of not wanting the night to end. Outside the windows, the hills were darkening under the deep blue of evening, the world slowing down as if echoing their stillness. Daniel looked at each of his daughters, really looked at them. Riley, always vibrant now, resting her chin in her palm, eyes sleepy but glowing. Chloe, arms crossed, but relaxed, the edges of her guardedness softened more than usual. And Maya, curled slightly in her chair, fingers playing with the hem of her sleeve, her smile small but real. He inhaled, then let the air go slowly, like exhaling a decade's worth of weight. "You know," he began, his voice steady and low. "For most of my life I thought I had to be in control of everything, that I had to be perfect at everything I touched, especially when it came to being your father." The girls looked at him, attentive now, sensing the shift in tone. "I thought being a provider meant having the answers, always fixing things, always being strong." He paused, eyes flicking toward Maya before sweeping back to Riley and Chloe. "But today, sitting here with you, I realized something." He leaned forward, elbows on the table, voice gentler now. "Today, I'm not a CEO. I'm not anyone's hero. I'm not trying to be some larger-than-life figure who holds everything together. I'm just a man, a father, trying to learn to listen, to show up maybe for the first time in the right way." He swallowed, blinking once, then smiled softly. "Today I'm just a dad, learning everything from the beginning." He looked at Maya as he said it, then to the other girls. "And that's enough. For me, that's enough." The room remained silent, but not empty. It was full of acceptance, of love, of the quiet power that comes when a man lays down his armor and chooses to simply be there. No title, no script. Just a father, finally at home. Sometimes life doesn't give us second chances in the way we expect. It doesn't come with a sign or a warning. It comes quietly, like a lost child at a gas station or a moment at the dinner table when you realize the people around you are no longer broken strangers but family. Daniel Whitaker's story reminds us that no matter how powerful we become, no matter what roles we play in the world, CEO, leader, provider, what truly defines us is how we show up when love is on the line. You don't have to be perfect to be a good parent. You don't have to fix everything to be enough. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you don't have all the answers and start again with open hands and an open heart. Maya didn't ask for luxury or for justice served in courtrooms. She asked to exist, to be seen. And that's what so many people in this world are still silently yearning for, to know their name matters, their presence matters, their story matters. Maybe there's someone in your life right now, forgotten, distant, misunderstood, who just wants to be seen. Maybe that person is even you. So here's the truth. Healing is messy, but possible. Rebuilding family isn't about erasing the past. It's about choosing each other in the present, every single day. If this story moved you, if it reminded you of someone, or made you reflect on your own journey, drop a comment and share your thoughts below. We'd love to hear from you. And if you believe in the power of redemption, of second chances, and of quiet, ordinary love that save this video for later, and subscribe to our channel for more stories like this. Because sometimes what heals us the most is simply knowing we're not alone.